Cowboy Festival. We are so excited to be able to get this started again after a couple of years. So to introduce our chef, I'm going to have our FCA president come up, and she's going to give you a little information about her.
Nico Albert Williams is the owner and executive chef of Burning Cedar and Indigenous Foods, a catering consulting company based in Tulsa, Oklahoma. She spends her time cooking, eating, studying, writing, and speaking about traditional and modern Native cuisine. Nico is also the founder and board president of Burning Cedar Sovereign Wellness, a pending 501c3 nonprofit organization of forthcoming urban indigenous community space, whose mission is to address socioeconomic disparities, health crises, and cultural disconnection affecting indigenous communities by reestablishing ancestral foodways, birthing practices, and traditional medicine, educating future generations of indigenous cooks, supporting indigenous food producers, teaching sustainable and environmentally restorative practices, and providing resources for Native people to improve their spiritual and physical health through ancestral ways of knowing. Chef Nico's work has been featured regionally and nationally by Food Network Magazine, USA Today, Hulu, BBC, Cherokee Nation's OSUIT TV, Smithsonian National Museum of American History, King Arthur Baking Co., Alice Obscura, PBS, Gilcrease Museum, and Philbrook Museum, among others. She shares a fireplace with her husband Kyle Williams Sr., her stepdaughter, two perfectly mischievous little dogs, and two rabbits. Nico and her family enjoy spending time together outdoors and dancing at powwows. She and Kyle also play music in heavy metal and beer bands. Please help me welcome Chef Nico.
Great to be here. Thank you all so much for coming this afternoon, and hope that you're enjoying the salad so far. I've really enjoyed the experience of being able to come here and work with these students and kind of share a little bit about traditional indigenous foods and hopefully inspire the next generation of indigenous chefs, because that's what this is all about, is taking our traditional ancestral ingredients and our ancestral foods and taking them into the future so that we can hopefully in the coming generations see more Native restaurants and places where we can experience this type of food. So the salad that you're enjoying today is an ancient grains salad with spring greens and a mixture of quinoa and wild rice from the Red Lake Nation, Chippewa people up in the Great Lakes region. And then the dressing that is on that salad is an acorn squash vinaigrette. It's a roasted squash vinaigrette. So that's the dish that I'm going to actually demonstrate for you today. I'm going to show you how to make this vinaigrette. For me, one of the most important things about incorporating more vegetables into your diet is that it has to be delicious, right? And it has to be easy. And one of the things that we go to when we're looking for ways to have fresh vegetables in our diet is salads. But I don't know about y'all, I have a real ranch problem. And it can't be ranch all the time. It can be ranch sometimes, but it can't be ranch every day. So I wanted to show you guys an easy way. This is vinaigrettes are a great way that you can use up that last little bit of something extra in your refrigerator. And once you kind of get the ratio of a vinaigrette mastered, the vinegar to oil and the technique of mixing it, you can season it with anything you want, so it doesn't get boring. And that's the other thing, is you just can't be eating the same thing every day. You gotta keep it lively and fun, and that's what vinaigrettes are to me. But the problem with buying vinaigrettes at the grocery store is a lot of those, you look at the ingredients, and the first ingredient is sugar or salt. There's so many preservatives and things like that that keep your dressing stable on the shelf forever that it's really not, kind of taking a step back when you're trying to take 2 steps forward by eating vegetables. So making a vinaigrette at home is a really great way to incorporate healthy things into your diet and know what you're eating, because that's important. So it's a lot easier than you would think to incorporate all of these ingredients. And so I've got everything I need right up here. I've got some apple cider vinegar. And I think you guys have been provided the recipe for this on the QR code on the cards on your table. So this is something you can make at home. It makes a quart of dressing, which is a lot, but it keeps for a very long time. The vinegar in this recipe, it's mainly just vinegar and oil, so it preserves for a long time. And you can use it on all kinds of different things. So we start with the vinegar, and then I've got some ancho chili powder. I believe the recipe says chipotle powder. Any kind of chili powder that's gonna give it just a little bit of zest is good. And then I've got some maple syrup. Kind of balances out the tartness of the vinegar. A little bit of salt. Some garlic. I believe in my recipe it says something like 5 cloves of garlic. Anytime I read a recipe, I'll take the number of cloves of garlic that they tell me to do, and I'll like double it or triple it. That's the fun thing about making your own food, is you can interpret it the way you want. 2 cloves of garlic, whatever that means to you. You can do that. And then I've got about a tablespoon of whole grain mustard. Mustard is going to be what stabilizes our vinaigrette. When you make a vinaigrette, you're mixing the oil into the vinegar, and when we do that in a blender, it creates an emulsion. That's what makes your vinaigrette nice and kind of stable, like a creamy vinaigrette, instead of separated out. And the mustard helps keep it together. And then the last ingredient I have here is, this is some acorn squash that we roasted. It's not seasoned with anything. You could season it with salt and pepper if you were doing this like as a side dish or something like that to eat. But then if you've got some left over, it's great to put in this vinaigrette. You could use canned pumpkin if you wanted to. It's a great way to use that like leftover cup of canned pumpkin if you open a can and don't use the whole thing. So I'm just gonna scoop out about a cup into this. And then I've got some salad oil here. My favorite oil to use in vinaigrettes is avocado oil. And I love using that actually in all kinds of different applications, especially like for sauteing foods. Avocado oil is a good fat, so it's a healthy fat. And you can get it really, really hot, so it's good for frying things in a pan. But then it also makes a good vinaigrette because it's got a really neutral flavor. So unlike olive oil or something like that, it's not going to take over all the flavors that we have in here. We want to be able to taste the pumpkin and the chili. So I'm just going to put that lid on nice and tight so that we don't have an explosion here.
Great. Stevie probably did that.
Yeah. And I'm going to let this mix just a little bit until everything's nice and blended. I almost forgot one of my favorite parts, the sage. I've got some fresh sage leaves here. Another fun part about making vinaigrettes is the blender does all the work, and you don't have to chop all these herbs, you don't have to chop the garlic. Everything just goes straight in there. And you let the blender do the work. So we're gonna turn that up to about medium speed, let it really get going. Once everything looks like it's good and chopped, I'm gonna start drizzling my oil. And I'm just gonna do a really thin stream, very slowly, and allow it all to incorporate in here. That on all sorts of things. It actually makes a really great marinade for chicken. You can put it on fish when you put it on the grill. There's all kinds of different things that you can use this for. So even though you've made a lot, you can put it on a lot of different things and use it in different ways. And it's got that nice creamy consistency, which makes it great. Also good as a dip for different vegetables, things like that. So a lot of different ways that you can use that. So this is an example of what my company, Burning Cedar Indigenous Foods, specializes in. Because I know my ancestors were probably not making these complex vinaigrettes. That's not the way that we ate traditional foods. But the ingredients in this are all traditional ingredients. We've got our pumpkin, we've got our sage, we've got chilies. All of these are things, the maple syrup, all of these are things that are indigenous to North America. They're ingredients that our ancestors had. And so what modern culinary techniques we can use, we apply those to our ancestral ingredients, and we're able to move our foods from the past into the future. And that's what modern native cuisine is about. So again, the salads that you're enjoying right now, our ancestors did forage greens and eat a lot of seeds and nuts and the wild rice and the quinoa and all of those things, but we're putting together those ingredients in a modern presentation. And that puts our people into a contemporary context, which is so important, because that's one of the issues that we deal with in Native America today, is that people think of us in a historical context, because that is how we've always been presented in history books as people that used to live here. But we still live here, and we're still here, and we still use our traditional ingredients, and we still make our foods, and we've evolved just as every other culture has evolved. Italian food isn't the same as it used to be back in the day either. So our foods have a place in contemporary cuisine, just like any other type of cuisine, and we should see more of it. And so that's why it's so exciting for me to be here and work with these students, because hopefully they're getting inspired to use these ingredients in a different way themselves. Take everything that's learned here in this culinary program and apply it to our traditional ingredients and our traditional foods. And that's one way that we can heal as well. There are so many issues that we deal with in Indian country. Health issues like diabetes, heart disease, obesity, even our mental health issues, where we see so many people suffering from depression and mental health disorders and suicide. All of those things come from what happened with colonization and from being separated from our culture. And so these traditional foods are a way to get back to that culture and reintroduce these healing ingredients that not only heal our bodies, but they heal our connection to each other and our connection to our culture and our ancestors. And that's an important way of healing, is by using these foods not only to reduce our blood pressure and get us more active and to heal our bodies with the vital nutrients that they contain. It's also about healing spiritually, and so that's what these foods provide. And the more people that we can teach these foods about, the more people that can bring these recipes into their homes and offer them to the wider public, the better off I think everyone, native and non-native alike. So I know the rest of the menu that we have on here, we're starting to clear off some of the salad plates. The next course, you'll be getting a bison and Three Sisters stew. So the bison we got from the Osage Nation. They have a butcher house in Hominy, similar to the Creek Nation looped knot meat processing facility. Some of the COVID funds that the Osage Nation got was put back into food sovereignty for their nation. So they opened up this meat processing plant to address the problems of the supply chain problems that we were seeing during COVID, where there were all of these people with cattle that needed to be processed, and the meat processing plants couldn't take them. And so there was this backup. So what they did was create their own meat processing plant, and now they're able to process the bison from their own herds, and all of that revenue and the jobs created go back into their community. So this bison is food sovereignty in action, and it also happens to be extremely delicious. So we roasted that bison. It was a huge bison chunk roast, about 14 pounds of it, and we roasted it slowly overnight. A lot of people, if they've ever had bison before, one of the struggles with bison, if you think about it as a struggle, I don't, one of the best things about bison is that it's so lean. It's so much leaner than beef. It's a much cleaner, leaner form of protein, but you have to know how to cook that. So what we did was roasted it very, very slowly overnight at a very low temperature, and what you get is just this silky, fall apart, tender meat. And we mixed that into a stew with corn, beans, and squash. Those are our Three Sisters. So we call them the Three Sisters because they're planted together and they grow together and they help one another grow. And that is a planting method that is traditional for indigenous people all over North America. The corn is planted and that's used as a support system for the beans, which are a vining plant. So the beans wind their way up the corn stalk and use that as like a trellis. And then we plant the squash at the base of that, at the base of the mound that we plant. And the squash leaves are very large, and so they shade the ground and keep the moisture in. And the little prickly hairs at the bottom of the squash leaves keep pests away from digging at the roots of the plant. So it protects it in multiple ways. And then the beans have this amazing ability, because they're a legume, to pull nitrogen from the air and transfer it down through their roots into the soil. That's something that most plants can't do. So that's why when you grow fields and fields of corn as a monoculture, meaning you're only growing corn in those fields, you have to fertilize the fields, and that ends up being lots of chemical fertilizers or extra fertilizers that have to be put into the soil. But when you plant beans and corn together, the beans provide that for the corn. So they enrich the soil and feed their other two sisters, the corn and the squash. They get that nitrogen in the soil. And so this is a form of regenerative agriculture that our ancestors developed. It's a technology that adds nutrients to the soil as the plants grow, rather than sucking all the nutrients out of it and leaving ground that can't be planted again. So that's an important farming method that's kind of on display in this stew, because if it grows together, it goes together. That's kind of how we look at it. These plants are meant to grow together, and they're meant to be served together. So this stew will have veau beans. That's another name for the scarlet runner bean, but I enjoy the name veau better because they do look like little bear paws when you see them. They're adorable, nice, but actually really big, meaty, hearty beans. And then we've got 3 different kinds of squash in that stew. It's all winter squash, different types of pumpkin that I actually brought back from North Carolina from a trip back to the Cherokee homeland. So there's a bunch of different kinds of squash in there. And then there's also corn. And we were able to, I showed the students how to process corn and make hominy from scratch in the old way. So we used hardwood ash from a pecan wood fire. We mixed that equal parts ash and corn with water, and we saw that process happening, that alkali process where the corn is called 蜱zekalization. And so you add the corn and the ash and the water, and the ash has a chemical reaction with the outer hull of the corn where it slips off, and then you have hominy. And so that's the hominy in your stew. It was actually made in that old way that our ancestors developed. And then the rest of it is just broth from all of those ingredients that infused themselves into the stew. So all of the flavor and all of the texture and all of that deliciousness that's in this stew comes directly from the ingredients themselves. You don't have to add a bunch of bouillon or salt or things like that, because when you're using really high quality ingredients, they provide the flavor that you need. And you don't have to add processed flavors. The things you're tasting are the actual ingredients in the stew. And then we'll also, after that, be serving an Appalachian spiced sweet potato souffle. So these will be served in a cast iron skillet family style. And it's kind of like the sweet potato casserole you might be familiar with, but instead of using flour and tons of butter and all of these other things, we have a little bit of butter in there. You gotta have a little bit of butter. But it's sweetened with maple syrup, which really complements the sweet potatoes themselves. And then the topping is made with pecans and maple sugar. And then it's spiced with some cinnamon. And then Appalachian allspice is a wild spice. It's actually from the spice bush berry. We just call it Appalachian allspice as a reference to its origin. It grows all over in the Appalachian region, and it also actually grows here in Oklahoma. But it's something that you really have to forage. You can't buy it at the store. So you forage these berries, you dry them, and they end up looking like little kind of football-shaped allspice berries. And they taste like a cross between allspice and black pepper. It's just a really fragrant, pungent, beautiful spice, and you'll be able to pick that out in the dish itself, because it's that, what is that kind of flavor? It's like allspice, but it's not exactly like that. So that's the flavor in there. And again, just a healthier dish, because we're taking out some of the things that we don't need. We don't need all of the sugar and flour to make a satisfying dessert. So that's our take on the indigenous version of your sweet potato casserole. So So it looks like soup's coming around, and I'm gonna let you guys enjoy that.
Yes. Yes, we're good.
Yeah, we're gonna do a question and answer. So does anybody have a question?
Yeah, sure.
I have a question about the ash, if I use that to remove the hull. Does that add any nutritional value, and how in the world did someone come up with that to be able to do it?
Those are great questions. We actually had similar questions with the students yesterday when we processed it. Yes, it does add calcium to the corn, and it unlocks the niacin in the corn. That chemical reaction by removing the hull unlocks and kind of activates the niacin in the corn so that you're able to absorb that in your body. And I think there's a lot of, there's a few different theories of how that came about, but the way that I understand the origin of that process is that in ancient times when we first started cooking corn, we didn't have pottery, we didn't have, obviously, steel pots or iron pots or anything like that. We had very tightly woven baskets. And so you would take these very tightly woven baskets, and that would be your pot, but you couldn't set that directly on the fire, it would burn up. So what they would do is they would get stones really, really hot in the fire, and then they would place those hot stones in the water to boil it. And then as the water cooled down, the stones cooled down, they would take those out and replace it with more hot stones. And these hot stones would be covered in ash from the wood fire that they're heating up in. And if you're cooking corn or whatever kind of seed you're cooking in that hot water, the little bit of ash is coming off of those stones. I'm sure they were able to notice that there was a reaction happening with those hulls slipping off. So that's what I theorize would have been the origin of that process.
Any other questions?
I don't have a question, I just have gratitude to express to you for making the connections that you did to our ability to heal through returning to traditional ways. And so thank you for pulling in that aspect, celebrating all the strengths, the beauty, the wisdom that we have, and using food to teach culture and healing. Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
All the food is amazing. I have to ask, and I don't know if you can share the secret, but your fry bread is very unusual. It's almost like Yorkshire pudding. It's so light and fluffy. Can you share kind of the process to make it that way? So, because whenever I make it, it's always like dense.
It's very, very simple. I'll share my fry bread recipe with all of you, and it's something that I learned from my friend Anita's family. Her mom invited me over one day to show me how she makes fry bread, and one of the secrets is that it's actually a very wet, loose dough, and so I start with self-rising flour, and then I add just enough hot water, hot enough, the hottest I can get it without it burning me, basically. And I add the hot water until the dough comes together into like a very sticky dough. And then I'll add just a splash of buttermilk until it's kind of can pull apart between my fingers like this. And then I let it rest. The resting part is very important. This dough rested at least for an hour. I'll sometimes make my dough in the morning and leave it to rest all until the evening when I make dough, when I can fry it for dinner. So the resting is very important. And then once you are trying to shape the dough, I'll take a scoop or a spoon and spoon into a clean bowl of flour, and then just very gently toss it in the flour and pat it out into my shape. You don't want to overwork the dough. Like once it's already shaped in your palm, just try not to handle it as much as possible. Once the dough is mixed together, you just got to be very gentle with it because you created all of these air pockets in there, and if you smash them all out, then you're going to have a really dense, chewy kind of dough. So that's the secret.
Any other questions? Maybe from one of the students?
I was just curious more about your personal self as far as when you were a child and growing up and how you got so interested and so knowledgeable.
Sure. Well, part of my journey with Indigenous food was from growing up away from my tribe. So I was raised in California and Arizona, which is very far away from the Cherokee people, which are my tribe. And I was always raised, knowing that I'm Cherokee and being proud of that, but not really having any way to connect with my community. And my family have not been traditional for many years, so we didn't have like the foods like this growing up. My father is Acadian, and so he, grew up in New Brunswick, Canada, and we grew up with all of that culture, but none of the stuff from my mom's side, from the Cherokee side. And then what ended up happening through a weird twist of fate and the oil industry, my dad got transferred to Bartlesville, Oklahoma when I was a senior in high school when they left. And so they moved to Oklahoma, and I followed a couple years later. And when I moved here, that was about 2003. And it was kind of an opportunity for me to connect to the Cherokee community and to really be able to participate in my heritage in a way that I hadn't been able to before. And the first thing that got me connected was wild onion dinners. So it was springtime, and I didn't know anything about any of that. I was just kind of on the back burner looking for ways to connect. But really, all it was I would meet Cherokee people, and that had never happened to me growing up. You don't just run into Cherokee people in California all the time. So having these people around me all the time was really exciting. And then springtime came, and everybody was talking about, oh, which one are you going to go to, and blah, blah. And I was like, what are you talking about? And can I come? And of course, they brought me with them, and I got to experience all those different foods. And the cook in me, I wasn't a professional chef yet, but I grew up cooking. And so that made me feel like, okay, this is how I can learn about what it is to be Cherokee, is learning to make all these foods. And so I was able to start, just by asking everybody's mom and auntie, can I come over for making food? And they would show me how they were doing things, and it kind of just grew from there. And so it became a passion of mine as a kind of side hustle, I guess you would say, from my regular restaurant day job, to try and learn as much as I could about Indigenous food. And it expanded beyond just, the foods of Southeastern tribes to, I began learning about all the differences and the variety of food that there is in Native America. Because once you learn about the foods that we eat here in the Southeast, and then you make friends from other tribes and other communities, you realize that there's very distinct differences between all of our different foods, and it's all so closely tied to land that you can really understand a lot about a people and where they're from and what's important to them and what their identity is through the foods that they associate with, because everything about being Cherokee is tied to the Cherokee land, the Appalachian region that we came from, and then now the region that we're in here. Our ceremonies are tied to our foods, and our belief systems are tied to our foods. And the same goes for every nation from, here to Alaska. They have such different varieties of things that they have relationships with in the natural world. And so learning about those relationships through food is a great way to understand a person's culture. And so it just was fascinating to me, and that's how it grew into being this whole, kind of business that it is now. Thank you for that question.
Any others?
That was a great question.
So, like you had it all on the tables, and I was curious, do you happen to have a cookbook out
have a website you can blog about?
I have a website, burningcedar.org. You can go there and check out everything that it is that we do. And you can also contact me through that if you ever need to get hold of me for educational events, caterings, anything like that. I don't have a cookbook yet. I have recipes in a few different cookbooks that are scattered around. There's a list under the press page on my website. There will be a list of books that I have recipes in. But it is something that is being worked on. So talk to me in a couple years when I have time for it.
Do we have any other questions? I'm going to invite Chef Johnston up.
I'll take some pizza out of your way. May I take some pizza out of your way? No, I'll be right
So we have dessert coming.
It was really cute.
But I want to invite all the students to come out so you can see all the different classes that have put their efforts in yesterday and today to work with Chef Nico to make this meal. And an additional thank you to Chef Nico for coming not only today, but yesterday for most of the day, working with a whole different set of students. So it was a great experience for them. We all learned a lot, so it was awesome. So we have your dessert coming now.
There's another roll of it.
Anybody have any more questions?
Yeah, the students were so amazing. I'm very thankful to have been able to work with them and hopefully inspire them to search into their own culture and what food they can find to be that incredible.